Hey folks, VM Explorer here. I hope you're having a great day. Hey, yesterday I got the honor and privilege to present to the vExpert, the VMware vExpert community around my Home Labs guide. So if you haven't seen it before, check it out. It's on vmexplorer.com. You go to Home Lab Guide and Info. Right, you click right here. Section 1 is the definitive guide, which covers all the basic things you're going to need to know about setting up a VMware home lab. Right. So if you click here, you can get the slides very soon. The video will be posted here for you to click to a link as well. But my slides are always here, and then I also post up. These are some previous sessions I've done on the Home Labs guide from far back as 2020. I've been doing it for many years through vMugs and things like that, and it really encompasses a lot of stuff. And I wanted to share this vExpert presentation with you. But you may be asking, hey, what is the vExpert program? So if you check out vexpert.vmware.com, it explains the program. Now, vExperts aren't necessarily the absolute strongest technology people. We are strong in technology. There's no doubt about it. It's what we do. But we also are involved in the community. Like we have YouTube channels and blog posts and Twitter accounts, and we're active on Reddit and the VMware communities. And VMware kind of rewards those folks that are very involved in the community and community efforts and share information out, similar to this Home Labs guide that I do for other folks to kind of help them move their careers forward. So if you're interested, we're actually, applications are open, but not too much longer. So if you're going to apply, get in there and apply, put in all your information, how you supply back to the community, how you give back to the VMware community, the virtualization community, and what some of the efforts you've been doing, and apply. Can't hurt. Why not? Try it. And then you get a lot of perks, like you get free licenses and a downloads page, and there's all types of great partner sessions, and it's just a really good group to be involved in. And maybe you have a technical question and you want to reach out to a fellow vExpert. They even have a directory of vExperts that you can kind of look up and ping folks and communicate with them. All of them are super friendly folks that just want to get involved and help each other. So definitely check out the vExpert program. You can also follow them on vExpert on Twitter as well. So with that, let's go ahead and I'm going to get the video rolling from yesterday. If you have any questions, put it in comments. And as always, I do hope you have a great day and do hit on that subscribe button. Thank you guys. Enjoy the video.
All right, well, let's get going. Hi, everybody. My name is Corey Romero. Been to VMware for 15 years. Been running the vExpert program for 9 years now? 9 or 10 years. For the vExpert program. And we're doing a webinar today with Dale. He is a senior technical marketing architect for VMware. He's also current 4 times the vExpert. He's also in the vExpert NSX and the vExpert security subprograms. He's also part of the Office of the CTO or Office of the CTO alumni at VMware. Now, Matt is a VMware as a staff. He is one of the regional vExperts and is a part of the Office of the CTO Ambassador Alumni Program. And so today we're going to do a talk that's a little bit different, and I'm really excited about. This is Home Labs. I've seen maybe it's not the same presentation, but I believe it's the same 2 gentlemen, but maybe with some updated information. I've seen it at VMworlds. I've seen it at Brown Bags. And I recall seeing it at vMug, but I'm not sure if I've actually witnessed it there. But today, we're going to witness it here, and this is also going to be recording, so if you have to hop off early, you can come back and finish it up. So with that, why don't we go ahead and kick it off?
Very good. Well, thank you, Corey. We appreciate the time and everyone coming in and joining us today. So let's go ahead and get rolling here. Come on, clicking. There it goes. So what's the purpose of this definitive guide? So over the years, a lot of themes and questions come up around home labs. I mean, we hear this when we talk with our fellow vExperts, or we're at a vMug or even VMworld sitting down having lunch, kind of like, where do I start? And, how should I build a home lab, or why should I do it? Right. What are some of your experiences with home labs? Do you have examples that I can kind of follow? We're going to hear the guides, right? I'm just trying to start out, right? What should I consider? What should I think about? and I listened to these questions and these conversations. I learned a lot from them, and I started collecting information. And that's kind of how this guide started, was me just working with folks, collecting information, having these conversations. And then I realized that as I started doing this in vMugs, back in maybe 2009 or so, this guide's kind of evolved more and more and more. And I've collected it for you guys here today for 2022. Okay. So we're trying to set some context here. I know this is a little weird. Why are we talking about a breakfast food, right? But if you think about it, home labs are like porridge. You're like, what the heck are you talking about? Porridge. Remember, we're setting context here. It's the Goldilocks principle. In home lab building, you're trying to find your just right. Right? I like sriracha on my porridge. Maybe that's too hot for you. Right? Maybe that's too cold for you. Maybe you like sriracha and ghost peppers on your just right. That's what you're trying to figure out. What is your just right? So there is no right answer for building your home lab. You build it to your specs, right? And you try to follow some guidance I have here, but you're going to find your just right. But how do we do that? So let's look at the agenda, and that's how we're going to kind of give you some ideas to do this. Remember, this is a guide in the form of a presentation, right? So there's some stuff coming up. So we're going to talk about considering, what is a home lab, why build it, consider, your experience, like where do you start? We got a lot of tables coming up, right? We'll talk about those here in a second. Building up your home lab. What are the kind of key areas to get going? We'll go through some recommendations to get started. I'll just give you a real quick preview towards the end of kind of what I have and what I'm doing, and then we'll follow this up with some helpful links. Now, this presentation typically takes right at 45 to 50 minutes, depending on how much we go through. Please use that chat. Dale and Corey and folks will keep up with it as best they can. It's a great resource for information as well. All right. So warning, eye charts ahead. There's a lot. Okay. It's this, again, this is a guide in the form of a presentation. So I'll post this on my blog, and Corey will get the slides as well and repost it for you guys. So you can kind of use this, go through. There's hundreds upon hundreds of links in here. We got some really good stuff for this year as well. I think you'll be impressed coming up here. But again, we're not going to read everything off. There's just a lot of eye charts coming up. All right, so consider the following about home labs. All right, so let's define what a home lab here is for this context, right? There's many different types, no doubt about it. But for this context, this presentation, a home lab is any type of non-production VMware environment meant for personal or development use. Depending on your expected outcomes and budget, it can contain different outdated or disliked hardware, or it may not. It might even contain cloud connected resources. So could be very broad, but we're trying to focus down on VMware home labs, commonly known as, VMware Workstation, doing some nested environment, or maybe you have a vSphere environment like with vCenter Server, ESXi, vSAN, etc. But why build it? In talking with folks, I kind of come to realize there's kind of two types of folks. Some do both. Some like that hardware aspect. Some like the software aspect of building a home lab. Me, I'm a hardware guy. I love it. I love getting in there and figuring things out and hooking things up and building my own home lab from scratch, right? I just something I look forward to during the day. But some people don't like that. They like the software side of things quite a bit. Right. And they like to, okay, I'm just going to get a commodity server. I know it's going to work. I'm going to spin it up, go get me to the software. Right. So they kind of fit on both. And if you think about those, some do both. Right. What would you use that for? I mean, certification prep is a really good one. I recently just passed the VCIX for a data center virtualization. And without my home lab, man, it would have been a lot harder. But it made it easier so I could go through and do things I commonly don't do. So certification prep, absolutely. Career advancement. It kind of makes you look like a thought leader. Think about it for a second. If you have a home lab and your company's never deployed Horizon, what if you deployed in your home lab first, months ahead of whatever your company's planning, and then you can come into those meetings and really talk at an authoritative level, so to speak, or an assertive level about what you've learned? It starts to put you into a more of a thought leader position. What about confirming a fix? I do that all the time. If there's something my customer has a question on, I dump it in the home lab, confirm it, make sure it's working, check it out, right? Maybe doing something different like you've never done before. It was the first time in my home lab I did Infiniband. Never touched it before, but I integrated it into my home lab and it helped me, my knowledge base expand. Emerging tech. There's always new stuff on the horizon. Getting it into your home lab first, not a bad idea. Or testing a theory. Maybe you've got an idea of how something works that you want to test out. But really, when it comes down to it, you're going to be gaining knowledge. And when you've got that knowledge and you start to gain more, don't forget to share it. Share it out. Join a VMUG. Get involved in the vExpert program. Whatever it is, start to kind of gain that knowledge, figure out what you're doing, share, and most of all, have fun. Like I said, it's the one thing I enjoy about doing a home lab is getting in there, right? So these are kind of some of the reasons to think about, why you might want to build it up. Okay. This is kind of a quadrant chart. It helps once again to kind of set your mind to think about things when we start talking about different home labs and what you should think about and not. Now, the more you move to the upper right-hand corner where it says current standards, latest and greatest on the HCL, quadrant 4, means it would be faster to deploy in a more stable environment. So that's like a, maybe a Dell or an HPE server, for example, that's on our HCL. It's got everything that it's supposed to have. It comes with support. It probably even has VMware support at some point. That's super stable, pretty fast to deploy, But then we move to the left, number 1, no standards, kind of community supporting emerging tech, things that aren't on the HCL. You might have stability problems, slower to deploy, right? And then the other 2 boxes, 3 and 2, it just depends on how you go. You might move from 4 into 3 as your hardware starts to age. A lot of us are facing that right now. We bought E5 Xeon processors as an example. They're starting to age. They're falling off the HCL, and now they're becoming less stable, but they're still relatively fast to deploy. Eventually, we might have a harder time with them as that tech starts to get older. And then hybrid standards, kind of partially compliant, and they might be, more stable. So you've built up a home lab, you've chosen 5 of your products that are on the HCL, 1 of them isn't. So it's kind of that hybrid kind of mix of things, right? So think about that when you're starting out. Where do you want to be? Remember that previous chart, hardware and software. Where do you want to be? If you're a software person, you're probably in 4, right? If you're kind of more of I like the nuts and bolts type of thing, you're more in 2 and 1 type of area. And that might kind of give you an example of what your experience is going to be like. And is that acceptable to you? Is it acceptable to have community supported, meaning blogs and threads and Reddit and stuff, right? You might have slower deployments, might be less stable, but does it meet what you're trying to do? Your porridge, right? That's what you're trying to figure out here is what is just right for you. All right, so planning it out. I love this cartoon. If your plan is to act randomly and hope for the best, I wish you good luck. Think about it. That's what we really got to do. Okay. Again, if your plan, and you're that little guy on that bicycle there, it's to get from the left to the right, and that's your plan in home labs, your reality may vary. You might have a few chasms, a bunch of trees to get around, a sailboat, and everything else, right? There's quite a bit going on there. So our suggestion is have a plan. And that's what this guide is about. It's going to talk about planning, get you thinking, right? But run it as same as production, right? The hardware, the network power, cooling, installations, documentation. Try and do it as a production environment. Why? Because you'll get a better experience, and it'll also help you move your career forward. You start thinking that way. It builds those kind of memory muscles, right? When you're doing something repetitively, have a really good plan. If you just start throwing it out there, your plan, you might not have a good experience, and you might be kind of taken off from home labs, and then it becomes a thing in the corner that you don't want to deal with, right? But start it out small. If you're just starting out, start out small, build it up, but have a plan. We talk about that throughout this presentation about kind of starting small and building it up. All right, so here's an example of home lab planning, right? So first, this is kind of what I do. I think about and document my initial use cases. Resist buying first. Don't go out and buy stuff, right? Start getting the plan together. Evaluate that software, right? Hands-on labs, workstation are always good. The VM requirements, use common software requirements chart to help, which we're going to go through in a minute here, right? Review and document using the home lab design considerations chart. Again, another chart we're going to go through down below, right? So this is the kind of steps I do, is I will go through and think about design considerations. What do I need physically? What do I need software wise, right? Kind of choose those solutions. I finalize my orders, start getting things together. And most of all, right? I learn from my mistakes. Yes, I've made a lot of mistakes in home labs. I've been doing it for a while now, right? But I update that documentation and then repeat. And if you kind of follow a process similar to this, it helps you to get a good experience. All right, so here's eye chart number one. A lot of information, right? This isn't all inclusive to all the vExpert licenses we have. These are just some of the common ones that folks might think about when they're doing a home lab. As you can see, we've got software products on the left. We got CPU, RAM, disk requirements, and then we got recommended links on the right. This helps you to start going through. So think of this as a checklist. Maybe you're going to do VCSA, check number one, okay? ESXi 7, right? That's the number one area of home lab failure because, depending on your experience and what you chose, you really get tight on that HCL if you can, okay? And as you move down, maybe you want to do vSAN 7 as well. So the first three. So now you move over to the right and you say, okay, well, what size VCSA do I need? What are the requirements? Okay, will I do a tiny deployment? Will that work with the amount of hosts I have, right? So I might need 2 vCPUs. I need 12 gigs of RAM, and I need relatively good size disk. I have to estimate that. So I start putting my numbers together. Now, we all know very well, there's 1,000 different ways to cheat, so to speak, right? So 12 gigs is a big requirement for VCSA for a lot of home lab users. There's no doubt about it, right? But I'm sure if you went online and found a blog or two on how to edit that and bring it down and make it tighter, by all means, you could do that, but you're altering your experience as well. Again, decision and planning. Come through and figure out how much RAM you're really going to need. How much RAM can you afford? Are there some options to adjust the RAM to make it more efficient for your home lab? Can you get by with that? What are some of the outcomes of doing that? What's your experience going to be like? Is things going to run slower? Will they not work? Is that acceptable? Right? So this is kind of that planning and software phase. Check off what you want, total things up, get an idea of how much you need, right? And you're starting to estimate your host base. Right? All right. I said there were eye charts, and I wasn't kidding. One of our fellow VMware employees has put this together and it's given me approval to give this out to the vExpert team. This is new for 2022. Every single one of these products is a VMware product. Okay, whether it be engineering products, all our projects here, you can see there's Monterey, Arctic. I mean, they're all there on the right in gray. Every single one of these is a link. Okay, it will take you to the product pages. It'll take you to the information. It will help you plan. Massive eye chart. Lots of great information here, especially the core stuff down below where you might start out down here with vSphere, VCSA, vSAN. It's going to help you prepare faster instead of doing some hunt and peck. Definitely check this chart out when you get a chance to download these slides. All right. So this one's pretty important. These are a lot of the conversations folks have, kind of those design considerations. For example, initial cost. I get that question a lot. How much much does the home lab solution cost to build out? Right? Again, your porridge, your planning. You got to figure that out, but estimate it. Maybe you start out with a budget and your budget is $1,000. That's perfectly acceptable. just as an example, right? That's your kind of initial cost. You know your budget, you've got an idea, but what can you do with that? Okay. Maybe you want something that's quiet and running in the background. Like usually my home lab's up and running. Yeah, I made it whisper quiet, though it meets a lot of other requirements, misses on a few. Noise was important to me. You know, can you adjust the fans and things? Can you pull those out? Heat and power consumption, right? If you're in a second story building and it runs typically hot and you put a 600 watt home lab in there, yeah, it's going to be hotter. It's going to be a lot hotter. Is that acceptable to you? How about the power consumption, right? Is that going to align to your monthly operational cost? You might want to estimate your how much power. How long are you going to use this? Is it going to run 24/7? Are you going to host things on it? Maybe you're hosting outside of your home lab. Maybe you're doing a Plex server on it. I don't know. Maybe you have some internal operations, VMs running on there that you need for other things you do in your home. A lot of us do that. And if it's running 24/7, burning 600 watts, 1,000 watts of power, how much is that going to cost you? Something to think about. Footprint and mobility. How much space does it take? Do you have the space? Do you need it to be mobile? I've talked with a few folks who are like, hey, I live in an apartment. It's basically a 1-bedroom apartment. I want to do home lab. NUCs, those little Intel NUCs work really good because they're small. That was their priority. That was their porridge. They really had to think about space over anything else. That mattered the most because they only had so much room where they're at to do it. Then again, I've talked with people that, allocate the entire basement of their house and put in full racks of servers, right? And lots of power, right? They ran power, 220 volt power, 30 amp, 40 amp circuits down there, whatever it is, and set it up as a full data center. They've done it that way too. So really think about that. Where's this thing going to go? How big is it? How small is it? And then flexibility. Based on the type of product you choose, how flexible is that solution when things change? So you bought those NUCs. They're great. They're super sexy, right? They're small. They're great on power. They don't make a lot of noise. Oh, by the way, you need 128 gigs RAM. Yeah, not so much, right? So you're kind of stuck, and that's kind of thinking forward in your plan, right? Planning that out and thinking forward. That might be an acceptable risk to buy NUCs today and then repurpose them for other purposes as you evolve your home lab. That could be your plan too. But think about that. If you buy a DIY server and you can pull things in and out and constantly evolve it from the get-go and use something over and over again, you have better flexibility. And then bleeding edge products. How well does your solution align to engineering or emerging changes without a major overhaul? Maybe you have to get it into 10 gig networking because you're starting to push the limits, right? You really want to get into all flash vSAN, but that wasn't part of your initial plan. How does your design evolve to that? Is it HCL listed? Doesn't have to be. Home labs usually aren't, right? But the closer you use that as a guide, the better experience you're going to have. Remember that quadrant chart we talked about? And your refresh cost, reusability. So think about that. You've got this great home lab, you put a lot of money in, you need to refresh or step it up. What's that going to take? What would that look like? Is it easy? Is it not easy? And then speed to use. That's that hardware software conversation we had earlier. If you think about it, the hardware guys were like, yeah, I'm going to build it. It might take me a month or two. It's okay. I like doing it. I'll get there. Versus the software guys, right? I want to get it. I want to get this thing today. I literally want to plug it in, boot to an ISO, get ESXi, install it today. It should work, right? So that might be something else to think about. And in some home labs, they don't necessarily work that fast because they're off the HCL. And these are the types of things you might want to start considering when you build your plan out. All right. So building up your home lab. There are 4 key areas that I kind of see with home labs, and we're going to start applying these charts and things we talked about into these areas here. All right. So we look at ESXi hosts, the physical box, the processors, RAM, etc. We think about the networking pieces, and then we also think about storage. And then over top of all of that is licensing and kind of services that go along with them. So let's start with hosts. All right. These are, common types of ESXi host building blocks. I call them building blocks because think about it for a second. You might start out with something, maybe that's that NUC there or that kind of workstation in the middle. And you might start out with putting workstation on it initially. But how can you evolve it into being a dedicated ESXi host and building more of it? That's kind of the building block idea. Maybe you get a DIY server, like that upper right-hand corner. That's your building block. And you put workstation on and get started. Maybe it's that enterprise class server. Maybe that works good for you, right? Maybe that's the type of box you want to start with. Or maybe you're just starting out on a laptop and you want to evolve into one of these building blocks. But there are different types, these categories. We have the laptop category, kind of NUC and microservers, the workstations and do-it-yourself PCs, right? And then enterprise class servers. But now the question is how do those align, right? So for the purpose of this conversation, we're setting a little context here because we're going to apply it to a few of those charts we talked about earlier, right? We've kind of got the nested workstation. Right. And that could be running VMware Workstation, maybe Fusion, Windows, Mac, Linux, on a PC laptop or a workstation class computer. Typically one CPU, lots of RAM, multiple drives, and a few NICs is kind of how we define a nested workstation. A lot of value here starting out on Workstation or Fusion, getting things going, planning, playing with it, getting it running. But what about a mobile compact cluster? Again, now we're running ESXi for the next three categories. So number two, right? Maybe a couple NUCs, a mini Mac, a few microservers, right? Nice, small, maybe one CPU, little limited on the RAM, a couple disk slots, maybe NVMe, Thunderbolt, external power supply, perhaps. Some of the things to consider about doing that. Business class workstation or a white box kind of do-it-yourself cluster. Again, very similar, but you have some more flexibility here. Maybe you run a couple, two or three of those. A few CPUs, lots of RAM, multiple disk slots, et cetera. And then your server class, again, running ESXi could continue, whatever you want, basically. If you're running a server class host, you're probably getting something, with three or more of those, could have lots of CPU, all types of things, some room for expansion. That's just this kind of defining those, because now we're going to apply these four into some design considerations. Again, eye chart, I know, but this is how you might compare and contrast these. These are this information is built on different conversations I've had and what people have said. Again, your porridge may vary. You may disagree with this, and that's okay, right? But this is kind of in general what you might be looking at. So if you're looking at nested workstation, you might estimate about $1,200 to have a decent, nested workstation. Usually they're good on noise, low on power, low monthly operational cost. You kind of read the chart down there. They're somewhat flexible. They might be limited in what you can do, not on the HCL, of course, right? And then the refresh cost, reusability, depending on what you choose, you should have a low cost to kind of repurpose that box, and usually pretty quick. You just get Linux or Windows, Mac OS, get Fusion, boom, you're ready to go, and then you're up and running. Really good way of starting out. But as we work to the right, we start comparing the ESXi models, whether it was that mobile compact cluster, the business workstation, which was that HP workstation that was on the previous page, do-it-yourself kind of white box cluster service class. You can kind of see these guys all have their pros and cons, right? Most of them are generally can be quick versus when we talk about speed to use, how quick can I get it operational, right? The do-it-yourself cluster can be a little bit slower because you got to assemble it, right? You got to get it working and figure it out. It takes time, right? But then it's really great on changing out components where some of the others are not. And this is kind of the table I use when I start thinking about, I want to start with my building block. I want to build something up. Where do I start? And how do these compare and contrast compared to design considerations, right? Maybe the server class is really what you want and it works well for you. You're okay with it being loud and you're okay with it being heat and high wattage. You've got the operational cost down. Large footprint is not a problem for you. You get flexibility, but really what you're targeting is like, I want speed to use. So I want this thing to work and go, and I don't care about anything else. So maybe server class aligns to what you're trying to achieve. Maybe the business workstation class, that HP workstation or Dell workstation, IBM Lenovo workstation. There's a bunch of them out there, right? Those are great value, right? And they can be a little bit less impactful as the other one. And that's kind of how I start to use this table and use this for conversations with folks to kind of look at, and they really start thinking about what they want to achieve. All right. So one tip, okay? We were talking about life lessons. So maximize your investments. I'm frugal when it comes to home lab. It's coming out of my pocket. There's very little in my home lab right now that I haven't paid for. The only thing that's come into my home lab recently were some storage arrays that Synology and Asus store sent to me as eval units. Other than that, I've paid for everything out of my own pocket. So when I do that, it comes out of my pocket. I want to maximize my value. So one strategy I had is, is kind of start up and build up from what you have. If you have desktops, start with desktops and gain experience, right? But you evolve it. Think about choosing items that you can repurpose. This is the example I had. At one point, I built 3 hosts kind of with a free NAS server. As you can see there in the bottom, I had one server that had a lot of disks in it, and then I had a couple ESXi hosts above. But when vSAN came out, I really wanted to take advantage of it. Well, I had all the resources I needed. I just had to repurpose and redistribute it. So I went from 2 hosts and a Workstation PC to 3 ESXi hosts running vSAN and a workstation. And that's kind of an example of thinking when you buy this product, how can you evolve it into the next thing? Is it flexible? That flexibility thing, right? So let me take a quick pause there. Dale and Corey, do we have any good questions or thoughts coming in?
Yeah, we've had a pretty active chat. I don't know that there's a lot of questions, but it's been active. It's been entertaining. Good, hopefully good. I've been dropping some nice little nuggets in there for you guys.
All right. All right, let's move forward. So kind of some trends for 2022. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. Generally, the prices are up when compared to kind of the 2019 timeframe. We've seen some increases across the board, and they vary, right? Some folks are getting some good deals on products, others are not. General guidance on CPUs, more cores the better, right? My advice would be stay away from 4-core CPUs. Really start pushing that envelope up, what you can afford. The more the better, typically. It helps you with your deployments, those types of things, especially if we're having to, different issues with hyper-threading and those types of things. So the more physical cores, kind of the better. Don't forget about the ESXi 32-core license kind of limit or a split, I guess you could call it. And then also this KB, great KB to look at, okay? If you're planning on vSphere next, right, or next version of vSphere, you might want to be aware of these CPU changes, which has been out there for a while. It explains which ones are not going to be compatible in the next version, okay? And that's public KB. Anybody can check it out. Some things, if you're building yourself with server boards and you're looking at like, hey, I want this super micro board, looks really great. It looks like it fit everything I want to do. And then it comes in and you have a narrow socket or an odd style heatsink adapter, right? Or you have to run their heat sinks, which are super noisy. So, there's little details to look at on server boards, especially where the holes are and how they mount, the size, how much power does it take? Does it align with my power supply? Bitfurcation and NVMe support. Definitely, if you can get those 2 on a system board, that comes in very helpful. It allows you to start splitting your PCIe slots. And then these should be together, right? You want bitfurcation and it needs to have NVMe support. One or the other, you can't quite do this. But if you want to put in a PCIe card, like an 8X PCIe card with a couple NVMe's, you want to split it up. Bitfurcation allows you to do that, plus NVMe support. Supermicros are good for builders, right? Take a look at their boards. They got a lot of options. The closer to the HCL, always better. Don't forget about those boot disks. The guidance has kind of gone back and forth on this. We still support USB boot, but really the writing's on the wall. Get away from it. Get away from boot from SD. Start getting over to some sort of persistent disk boot. RAM, man, if just based on my experience and a lot of other experience, if you can get your numbers up, great. If 32's a good number for you, maybe 32 gig, maybe you need multiple more hosts to do that. But if you can get your RAM numbers up, definitely. And if you can get larger DIMMs, if you can afford them, that's always helpful. It kind of frees up your slots, right? HBAs, kind of word to the wise, Dell or HPE and the big vendors, they make these servers on their own. They want you to buy their cards. I get it, right? Because it's a power thing. They've estimated the power that goes in that card, and can the power supply work with it? There's a lot of technology and engineering there. So if you go out and buy some random card and stick it in the host, it might work, right? But then your fans are all kicked up to super high and it's loud and noisy because you put an unsupported card in there. So think about those types of things when you're looking at enterprise servers. Again, stick to that HCL and vendor recommendations if you're doing that. Also, kind of on the HPA things is stop buying Realtek. I'm sorry, it's not supported. It is the biggest, it's like one of the number one questions we get. How can I get my Realtek NIC working in ESXi? Well, guess what? Realtek didn't come back in and go through the certification process for their things. They left it. They went on a different path. They went on a different journey. It's their company. It's their porridge. Let them go. But when you try and integrate these cards into ESXi hosts, can it be done? Sure. A lot of people have done it. But again, software, hardware person, what kind of person are you? Do you want quick to use, or do you want to struggle a little bit building a custom ISO, getting old Realtek NICs from, I don't know, was it 5.5 or something like that? You get it to work. It can be frustrating, right? I would suggest, sticking with, the Broadcom, Intel NICs, things like that are supported. You're going to have a much better day, right? Laptops. Absolutely. A modern performance laptop is a good starting point. Make sure it has cores and RAM, a lot of cores and RAMs, SSD, and NVMe SSD is the way to go. I'd avoid spinning disks. You're going to have a bad day, right? It's just going to not perform really well. And laptop costs, I think in general have been, surprisingly, relatively stable. All right. So those are some host trends to think about. Let's move on.
Hey, let me jump in here and hit you with a question that just popped in. I think I know the answer to it, but I wanted to maybe put it out for maybe a little bit of a group discussion. Josh asked, are there any hosted options that allow you to use ESXi? I don't know of any.
There is one.
Oh,
very
that's
expensive.
Why we ask.
Yeah, it's very expensive. I don't remember the company's name right now. Let's take a note and I'll reply back later on that. Or if they want to, they can always ping me on my blog, which will be at the end here, vmexplorer.com. They can hit me up that way and I'll get them that information. I have one, but it's not cheap. It's crazy expensive. And there was a previous company, again, their name splits me, many years ago. I think Oracle bought them. They were doing it for a while, but they fizzled up. So there's not a whole lot out there. Your best bet's probably Hands-On Labs. That's probably your best bet. Just get out there.
Or test
not persistent,
drive.
Right? Yeah, test drive.
If the functionality that you want to use is available in test drive, that's also a great place to go.
That's a great point. Absolutely. All right. So getting on to some networking pieces. All right. So what are the common types of networking? Most folks kind of start at the top here, right? And that's where they stay. Great place. Don't go below too much. Right. They start out with a great, they get a layer 3 switch maybe. It's got VLANs, managed, PoE. It has NetFlow, which is great if you want to do like VRNI, right? Maybe the speed is something you want to consider. Honestly, I think 10 gig is really becoming kind of the default minimum to kind of get into. I'm seeing a lot of home labs kind of push that envelope, 25 and 40 gig, SFP plus, maybe using the DAC cables there on the right. The SFP or the quad kind of SFP cables, depending on your requirements and what you're trying to do. To be honest with you, in just my opinion, having 40 gig is like having a Corvette in your garage that you never take out and you barely need it, right? Because you don't need that speed. But if you could push it, all the better to you, right? And don't forget good old crossover cables. They still work, right? In fact, there's actually some deployments out there you can find where folks have kind of used crossover cables to build up their home lab and get things working. But get a quality switch. And some switches, we'll talk about this in a minute. Some switches, can be very expensive. There's a lot of different brands out there to think about. There's a lot of options to think about, right? Infiniband, we'll just blow there. Man, you can get some really crazy speeds. They've been doing 10 gigs since 2001 in Infiniband. Stuff is dirt cheap, but it comes at a cost as far as maybe there's a gap. You're probably really familiar with IP, right? Ethernet IP above. You get into Infiniband, you get into a different game, right? It's not hard. It just takes time for you to figure it out, okay? And it can be very beneficial. It could be cost effective and fast, but you start leaning more towards that unsupported realm, right? So something to think about here on different types of networking that you might want to consider. All right, so how do they kind of stand up when we look at these two? Again, we talked about some of these just a second ago. The noise is typically the biggest concern I hear on networking is, the noise is so loud. A lot of folks will go in, swap out those fans. I mean, that's probably answer number one. Or pick a switch that doesn't have fans, from the get-go. You can do that too. That heat and power consumption, again, that can be a problem too. Some of these switches can run pretty hot. Licensing. A lot of folks don't think about licensing, but when you start getting into an enterprise class switch, depending on the switch you buy, it might require some sort of license. Some switches, they'll limit the ports, the default license. And if you want to use all the ports, you have to have a special license to enable them. Or maybe they don't enable certain features, right? The a la carte kind of method on a lot of these switches. So be careful when you're buying a switch. You might want to do your research, read up on it, try to understand what you're getting yourself into. And then if you're looking at older switches that might not be so current, what's the firmware revision? When's the last time they updated that thing? Is it dependent on old Java that doesn't work in your PC anymore? And you've got to make some custom VM with old Java and don't let it update just so you can use the web interface on it. I mean, these are things to think about when you're trying to figure that out, right? And what about footprint mobility? Where's it going to fit? How big is it? You got to think about those things. So a couple different things, to think about here. Typically, HCL listed really doesn't come into play because switches typically aren't listed. We typically talk about speed, PNICs, or what's most listed. And if you're looking at, RDMA, that's where Infiniband kind of comes into play. Now, Ethernet switches, absolutely, they can run a version. I think it's ROC. I think it's called RDMA over whatever it is. You can do it that way. But if you want to do RDMA, which is a technology that is like blazingly fast into the nanosecond responses, Infiniband's more of your things. Again, quick, well-supported Ethernet, slow for speed to use, right? Slow, and it might be a high learning curve. I've got some links below on Infiniband if you're interested on how I did it. I don't run it anymore, though I have the hardware sitting here. Eventually, I might hook it back up. I moved away from it and went back to Ethernet. All right. So some networking trends. I think we hit on a couple of these. 25 and 100 gig switches are starting to pick up in deployments. I was really surprised to see that. Again, low latency RDMA networks are starting to trend. Check out this vSAN blog here for more information. The 10 gig price port, it seems relatively stable. I haven't seen many changes there, right? Look for switches if you're looking just to kind of get started. Maybe look for a switch that's kind of multi-use, part 10 gig, part 1 gig. And those transceivers can be expensive too. You might get a cheap switch that is all SFP, right? Those little pluggable DAC cables. But if you need a transceiver for some reason to transfer it to, fiber or change it to copper or whatever you're trying to do, that's your plan. Those transceivers, the cost can be quite a bit. Now, most recently, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen William Lamb's blog. He has a section in there for home labs. And a lot of home labbers have gone in there and entered their home lab information. And they supply a link to all of their, various home labs and blogs and things like that. I went through every single one of those home labs and looked at the networking and what folks are doing and who's doing what with 10 gig switches and what switch are they using, right? So I got all of this information together and made a blog on the different home lab and all the switches I could find, and then posted it on Reddit, got a bunch more information in there. So there must be about maybe, 20, 30 switches listed in there now of different 10 gig switches that folks are using. Might be good for you to check out. Ubiquity, absolutely. I mean, it was definitely the kind of the number one switch out there by a single product. And then MikroTik was definitely, kind of a close second. They do a lot of 10 gig switches as well. All right, so storage. So for home labs, these are kind of the common types you might see. You might see something with vSAN, FreeNAS, TrueNAS, maybe OpenFiler, or different, storage arrays that you have out there. Okay. So let's think about a little bit about what you can get out of these. All right. So when you look at a storage array, you might be looking at some of these different technologies, again, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're looking at NFS, that's that blue box there. These are some of the things that NFS aligns to. The protocol, of course, NFS. It'd be inexpensive, right? This is kind of like your the devices, those physical devices like that Synology ASUS store I just showed a second ago, the OpenFiler, TrueNAS stuff, they can do NFS, right? You can set up an NFS, basically a data store, right? And you can kind of set it up. Great experience. You're going to learn a lot, because learning how to set up NFS probably is a question on the data center virtualization test, right? So is iSCSI, but it's a little bit different. iSCSI is kind of that hybrid between what NFS can do and what a SAN or fiber channel SAN can do. It's a block level technology versus a file level technology, right? Its protocol is kind of SCSI versus NFS. It appears as a LUN, right? And it works with virtualization, absolutely. And then you go all the way over to fiber channel, which I haven't seen many folks doing. Usually that's larger enterprise folks doing fiber channel. I'm not saying it can't be done. You could do fiber channel array if that's really what you want to get into. It can be a little bit more expensive depending on what you buy and support. Something to think about. The point is that out of a couple devices, depending on what you choose, you might be able to learn a little of both. For example, iSCSI isn't a bad choice to start with for a LUN for your home lab. You're going to learn a little of both here. NFS, again, another clear choice, to start thinking about how to spin up these items. Okay, so we think about it. We think about NFS, iSCSI, etc. We have a lot of things that have to go into play there. You have an array, maybe some switches, maybe some special cards, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, right? There can be a lot of components that go into it. And then with vSAN, when we look at that, we're using our existing servers, maybe some hard disks that we have around and SSDs to create that kind of cluster. So it kind of differs a little bit, right? And both have their advantages and disadvantages, and both are going to be on your tests. Big questions about both, right? So trying to optimize and learn what you can and thinking about design considerations and planning, storage is a big part of it. Okay, so let's kind of compare these three, right? Noise, again, depending on your host, how you set them up, vSAN could be low or it could be loud. Again, it varies, something to think about. Your heat and power consumption. I find my NAS doesn't burn a whole lot of power, but when you put in 10 disks or something in it, man, it puts out some serious heat. All right, it can do that. Does it have an app store? That's kind of important. Folks like having an app store on their array. With vSAN, no, that's not what it's designed for, right? Personal NAS, absolutely. Don't forget about how are you going to authenticate? Do you need an AD, OpenAD or whatever they call it. Apologies, slipped my mind what it's called. DNS, DHCP. Do you want to run Plex? Is it part of your home network? I mean, a lot of folks look at their personal NAS to be functional in their home lab, and that has a lot of value just on that alone. I mean, a cheap personal NAS just to do a couple functions lightens the load on your home lab, right? So if you can pull off a couple of VMs and have your NAS do those functions, that's a win in my book. Something to think about, right? Plus you have file storage and all types of stuff. Footprint and mobility. It just depends on the size and what you're trying to accomplish. Flexibility, totally in vSAN, it totally depends on your server setup. It depends on what you're able to do. Maybe you want to expand the array in some way, whether it be your personal NAS, whatever it is. You got to think about how can I get more things in it. Is it on the HCL? Again, depends on the product. For vSAN, my recommendation is stick to that thing as close to as you can, right? You're going to have a much better experience with it because it's been tested thoroughly, right? And it's all going to work really well and integrate well together. And then kind of speed to use, it just depends on what you're trying to do. Probably the quickest is probably the personal NAS. They're built for that, right? You turn them on, you power them on, you click a few buttons, you're ready to go. You read their documentation on how to do it, hit a few blogs, you're good to go. Building it on your own, like a DIY, like an OpenFiler free NAS stuff. Again, you're hitting docs, you're trying to figure it out, trying to pick the right hardware, right? Trying to get it to work properly. It can be a bit frustrating. It just depends on your experience and your use cases there. All right, so storage trends kind of for this year. Starting to see more all-flash vSAN clusters. When I was going through those blog articles, those home labs, I was surprised. A lot of folks starting to do more all-flash vSAN. Used enterprise SAS hard disks and flash SSDs, NVMe prices, they all seem to be going up, with the exception of maybe low-end or smaller size devices. But when you start getting into those terabytes, their prices have definitely gone up, unfortunately. But the market is kind of flooded with these less expensive enterprise SAS disks, right, from storage arrays. Look out for these. Lesson learned right here, buddy. I picked up these drives. I thought, man, this looks like a great drive. I thought, okay, well, a disk is a disk. It's a SAS disk. I just really didn't plan. It's my fault. I didn't plan. I should have planned better. Should have done my homework. Snapped at $40 saying, hey, you know what? If it doesn't work, I'll find another use for it. Well, guess what? A lot of these drives have like custom sector sizes or custom firmware. They may look like a Hitachi disk all over the place, right? But they've been retooled for a NetApp array or whatever it is. So if you're looking at these disks, you want to try and get the plainest generic SAS disk that you can, right? This is even true in SATA disks, like a data domain or something like that might have some low-end disks in there, right? I've had some of those that have worked very well and some have not. Just be word of the wise, check out what the disk is. I kind of highlight like that NetApp part number there. That's what I should have went in and dumped it into Google or Reddit or whatever it is and saw what other folks are doing and are they having trouble or struggling with this drive. It would have saved me $40. But hey, lesson learned. Sometimes when you're build it your own, you run into these issues. It's something to definitely think about. All right, licensing. So licensing across the board, whether it's VMs, hosts, networking, storage, all have licenses that go along with it. For VMs, I mean, Visual Studio, if you're into Microsoft, is a great avenue to get Windows-based VMs. Linux is generally free. You can find that pretty much all over the place. Hosts, servers, I mean, those server motherboards with IPMI, remote access, a lot of that stuff's disabled, and there's probably more. So don't forget about their licensing. Networking, we talked about that earlier. A lot of ports can be disabled. Things of that nature can also be disabled. So make sure you check out licensing. And then storage. Could be even more features that you get. Your target is an iSCSI storage array as an example. You bought this array thinking, hey, this is a great price, but guess what? iSCSI wasn't enabled because you need a license key to enable iSCSI. So again, all of these different things have licensing requirements. Okay, but what about VMware licensing? Okay, so these are a couple options to think about when you're thinking about licensing. The company you work for may have spare keys that they're willing to allocate you. That doesn't mean you duplicate. If you have a key in production, it's in production. You're not supposed to reuse it on other devices. Okay, so check your licensing agreement, work with your account team, TAM. We might have other options for you to kind of extend that out a little bit if you're trying to do like a short-term development thing. Okay, if you're a VMware partner, and we do have a lot of partners that are vExperts, consider using the not for resale keys, NFRs. These are for partners only. For general customers, we do not have an NFR partner. We can give you like 60, 90 day keys, things like that. But for partners, they pay for this program through Partner Connect, TAP, things like that, and they have NFR keys. A lot of them don't take advantage of these keys, and if you're working the company you work for, you may go back and see if they have spare keys for you to use. So there's a couple options right there. Don't forget about your vExpert keys, right? So a program perk here. I mean, there's a lot of keys. We've got so much with the vExpert program, right? The keys, whether they be beta, exclusive downloads that only vExperts can get. And don't forget about partner products. A lot of these sessions and stuff, they offer us free software to kind of test and eval. I mean, also use those partner contacts in vExpert as networking opportunities, right? Your company may not be running their backup software right now, but it's an opportunity for you to reach out to them and say, hey, look, I have a home lab. I want to understand your product better, right? So that I can see how it aligns to different things and moves forward. I can't say that I represent my company here, but I want to understand your product better. Don't be afraid to reach out to these partners and ask. What's the worst they're going to say? No. I mean, most software companies want you to try their products. So don't be afraid of that. If you need help, reach out to a fellow vExpert. That's why we have the directory, right? Or a vExpert Pro. They'll help you get started and understand this. I get lots of questions on my blogs, I'm sure as the other bloggers do all the time. Can you help me understand this? Can you help me understand that? How can I use these things? But your vExpert keys, great value, a great perk of being on this program, and it gets better every year. They're doing a great job. All right. So vMug Advantage is another program to think about, depending on your use case, your experience. You might want to consider this. The advantage to vMug Advantage, not only do you get keys, but you also get discounts as well. I think I went a little too fast. There it is. You also get discounts fast. So you get their 365 evaluation keys, right? Everything in the green here. But then you also get discounts on training, which is nice. Quite a bit off, actually. So if you're looking to do in-person training, you might consider a $200 membership in vMug Advantage and get 20 to 35% off your training. Sorry, my voice is starting to go there a little bit. All right. So they're a good option to think about too, especially at $200. You take one training class, it just more than paid for itself, right? These are some of the keys they have, which would be redundant if you're a vExpert in most cases. One thing about vMug Advantage, though, is, for example, some processors rolled off with vSphere 7. They actually created an ISO that worked with the older processors, making it easier for their users. So they have some advantages there. Something to think about, something to consider depending on your design. All right, so we're wrapping this up here. So we kind of talk about start, expand, evolve. Okay, here's how you start out. If you're just starting out with, a hands-on labs, right? Or a home lab, excuse me. Think about doing it this way. Drop a plan of what you want to accomplish. Use hands-on labs or test drive to become familiar with some of the common products, right? Get familiar with things. Do product research. Remember that chart back there with all those buttons? right? That's a great chart to go through and start clicking on things and figuring out who's on first and what are things and how much is. This is not time wasted, right? Don't be such in a hurry to get to a massive home lab and blog about it, right? Take your time, do it right. Start with hands-on labs, get through there, go to test drive. There's the link, go through things, right? It's a quick way to kind of start and carry over your experience into your next phase, you know? There might be some, you might be limited in some way, just, you know, word to the wise. Sure, you can deploy vSAN in a nested workstation. You can do it, right? But what about VLANs, or what about reaching it out past that workstation? See, there's some limits, right? But at least you got started with it and you understand the requirements and you start figuring it out. Great way to start. Start with the PC you have, you know, maybe you beef it up a little bit, right? You start out putting workstation on there and you get going, okay? And then maybe expand. So you, excuse me, you get past the hands-on labs and you've kind of started workstation, but now you want to expand workstation and make it a little bit better, right? So again, we'll always have the plan up first. Don't forget about DNS, Active Directory, some sort of authentication, NTP, where are those coming from, right? Don't forget about those things. Get it installed. Again, building your knowledge here. Think about it as a building block, right? You look at that hardware list I got here in the middle. You start to build up maybe a DIY PC. You kind of get it built up, right? It's good for workstation, but your goal is to get it into ESXi. It's a cost-effective way to kind of carry on into your next generation. Again, when you're working with workstation, no VLAN or external routing support. It's kind of wonky, let's put it that way. And performance might be a factor, especially when you're trying to run, you know, if you're running ESXi hosts nested on a single PC, don't expect it to run fast. The best thing you can do is use fast disk access and lots of RAM to kind of help it get going. That's the best thing you could probably do for workstation, especially NVMe. If you can go NVMe, great. If you have to go hard disks, use a lot of them, you know, one hard disk per VM type of thing. Else it's going to run really, really slow. So evolve. Now you've kind of gone through those phases. You've done hands-on labs. You've built up your workstation. Now you're ready to take up the next step to kind of evolve your plan into this. You know, go with vExpert or other for your licenses. You're building that up. You've got your NTP ready to go, DNS ready to go. You got those things kind of figured out. Maybe now you didn't carry your Workstation PC up. Well, use it for some other services. I use Workstation all the time. In fact, I have a full lab plus a Workstation PC. I've evolved it over many years. It didn't start overnight, right? You know, a case, you know, when you're thinking about the hardware pieces, maybe a couple hosts that, like I said, we talked about that grid layer 3 switch, maybe vSAN, all these things start coming into play that we've been talking about, right? Pick out a good host that is a building block. Look for things that have the right type of, you know, good size memory and can support different drive types. Boot to SSD or HD. Stick away from that USB boot. And, you know, in the power supply, look for efficient as possible. Remember, it's your money running this thing, right? So if you can get a better power supply that saves you a few nickels down the road, and you run it 24/7, it's probably worth it. And some of the things when you finally evolve into this is the kind of that the pattern you choose, really that longevity. How long can you keep it? You know, the flexibility. How can you control the cost, the heat and noise, right? Overall size can be a bit bulky for some designs when you're do it yourself, if you're going with a bigger box. But again, the design considerations above that we talked about kind of cover a lot of this. All right, so where's mine at today? So this is where I'm at today, right? I've got 3 hosts with a Supermicro motherboard and dual Xeon processors in each, 256 gig RAM in each. Yes, those motherboards, processors, and RAM are all going to have to get swapped out for the next version of vSphere Next. The processors are falling off the list. DDR3 is falling off the list, right? So I'm gonna have to target a change coming up here pretty soon if I'm gonna be able to stay on the top. 1 second. Sorry, my voice is getting a little scratchy there.
While Matt's clearing his throat, and I'll
Thanks.
step in and tap dance just a little bit for him. We're having actually a pretty lively discussion in the chat about UPSs, and from someone who's had to rebuild after a power failure. I would also urge you to think about that when you're doing this. You may not necessarily need to automate everything, but in my case, I would get these little bitty blips in the power, usually around 5 o'clock in the evening. And it was just enough to reset everything. And then, you're trying to bring stuff back up for the next hour. Hopefully everything comes back up. Invest in the UPSs. It'll be worth your time to do that, so that you can survive those little hits. And those of you that are familiar with Texas, yes, I lost power during the big freeze, as we refer to it down here. Just about everybody did. That's not what my UPSs are for. My UPSs just save me that time, that if there is some kind of little power hit, I don't have to spend the next hour bringing things back up. Matt, are you good to go?
Mm-hmm. I'm good to go. Thank you. Yeah, it's a great point on the UPSs. Absolutely. In fact, I think just last week I came across, and I think I'd seen it before, but really starting to look at it. They're using Raspberry Pis to kind of do the monitoring of lots of UPSs. So I have it bookmarked. I apologize, I forgot the name of it, but there is like free Raspberry Pi monitoring out there that you can hook into UPSs like this to automate it. These UPSs are meant to be hooked up to a PC. They're really not meant to be hooked up to like a server infrastructure to do a proper shutdown. But there are different devices out there to think about that might be able to help you do that. So on the cluster here, I run all flash vSAN, boot to SSD, and I use a ConnectX-3 card for my 10 gig connectivity. Great card, can be relatively cheap, versatile, does Infiniband. It can, depending on the model you choose, can do InfiniBand, can do Ethernet. So I like that flexibility in that card. Like I said, I also have a Workstation PC that I do a lot of testing on. My network's all MikroTik, right, for 10 gig. In fact, I got 2 of them in here just because I've kind of expanded it and needed some more slots. And then I run 4 Cisco switches, which might seem interesting, but I work for, I'm assigned to a partner who does industrial manufacturing. And some of the testing, I've kind of set up my home lab to be able to test some of their functionality using these different switches. They run some custom protocols for Ethernet that requires those types of switches. And that's kind of the flexibility, right? When you do something like this, you can kind of build up depending on what your use case is. My use case was try to help my customer, right? My VMware customer do more. Now, not all TAMs do this. I've just happened to be in this kind of area, right? And it's a good thing to do. So pretty much all the latest software right now, vSphere, vSAN, NSX, et cetera. And I'm doing some nested vSphere with NSX as well. I have some bandwidth testing coming up next. That's going to be using iPerf3. If you haven't heard of that guy, check it out. Pretty cool. You can put iPerf3 on all types of different devices, including into Docker, which I put into the arrays to kind of test out their bandwidth speed, Linux, Microsoft, your phone. It's got a bunch of different options. Pretty cool little thing. And then I'll be doing some more integration with the external storage coming up. That's what I have, and that's kind of what I'm up to give you guys some examples. All right, so some helpful links you might want to consider. I can't recommend this first link enough. It's a free community guide on VMware operations and management, 3rd edition. I think it might be higher by now, but this one definitely is worth a read, especially if you're just starting out, you're trying to figure things out. Go through that guide. It's great. If you're considering hands-on lab versus home lab, there's a great blog here. Lots of other great links here. I'm not going to go through them all. William Lamb, if you go to his williamlamb.com/homelab, you can register your home lab there. There's different price trends here, a bunch of different links here to check out when you have a chance. Some more design guides and things like that might help you out. Okay. If you want more information around this guide or other things, feel free to reach out to me. I'm usually pretty responsive, as responsive as I can be, right? Blog, Twitter, YouTube channel, got all 3 going there. And don't forget, folks, wrapping this up, porridge is only as good as you make it, okay? Keep that in context. Keep that in mind. Try to find your just right that works for you, not too hot, not too cold, but works for you. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I do hope you found this information useful. It was a really broad topic to try to kind of get things going within an hour. I know we went a little bit over, and I appreciate everyone staying over and your questions and chat. So, Corey, back to you, buddy.
Hey, thanks, everybody. Hey, do you guys mind if I post this on Twitter?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I've never done that before, but I think this is so helpful to the community, especially people who are wanting to do home labs at home. So, yeah, with that, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for staying on an extra couple minutes as well. I know there was so much information in there, and it was amazing. I'm like, I'm not going to interrupt this. I'm not going to stop this right on the time, right? This is great. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. To everyone who showed up on the call, thank you as well. Thanks for joining us. I know you took time out of your morning, afternoon, and evenings, and we appreciate that.